Glad that you all could join us for the next panel. My name is John Lehr. I'm Managing Director of Workbench. We're an enterprise-focused fund based here in New York City, so it's a nice trek down. And we're focused on investing in early go-to-market enterprise startups. A large focus for us is on security, so really happy to be here today. A big focus of ours is really on corporate engagement, on connecting forward-thinking Fortune 1000 companies with leading enterprise startups, or as we like to say, connecting the suits with the hoodies. We've got a great set of panelists today, and we're going to kick off with some quick intros, 30 seconds tops to set context, and then we're going to dive into our conversation, which is going to touch on everything from the early stage security landscape, what's interesting, what's overhyped. We'll get into how public companies are faring, some trends affecting them, and then the M&A outlook for the year. So Howard, I'll start off with you.
Hi, I'm Howard Morgan. I'm a founding partner in First Round Capital, which does investments at the first round. We've done a couple of hundred over the last 10 years, a number of them in the security space, and very excited to be talking to this group. And one of them in him.
Thank you. My name is Muddu Sudhakar. I'm VP GM at Splunk. I'm here to represent myself more than Splunk. So as a safe harbor statement, my views are my views. I'm happy to give you my views as a founder entrepreneur. Caspida has been my fourth startup. I've done startups in big data space as well as in security. And Caspida got acquired by Splunk last year, July 2015.
My name is Tom Kellermann. I'm CEO of Strategic Cyber Ventures. We are an investment vehicle for cybersecurity companies that are privately held that can thwart the Russian kill chain. Previously, 19 years cybersecurity experience, World Bank and IMF Treasury security team, core security penetration testing, and then recently a CSO of Trend Micro.
Excellent, thanks. Howard, let's kick off with you. From your perspective at First Round, what's most exciting at the cutting edge of security startup innovation?
Well, we're seeing literally hundreds of security startups a year, a huge number coming out of Israel and the 8,200 unit stuff, but a lot here in the US that are exciting. We've seen a lot of now, after the Sony hacks, about protecting your email, protecting against spear phishing. Area 1 security is one we did recently in that area. A lot trying to work inside your network to protect. We've seen a number trying to be at the edge in terms of controlling access in all different ways. You name the biometric, we've seen it, and we've seen those biometrics pulled together with time of day and other indicators. We've seen, I think, four different startups that use your mobile phone, not just for two-factor authentication, but for continuous authentication. So they're both using the camera to make sure it's you, and they're using your motion to make sure it's still you doing things. They're using your key patterns. Everything that says, even while you're in the middle of the transaction, they're authenticating once a second to make sure you're actually the user who signed on. And we've seen a number of takes on that. Huge amounts of big data being used to pull this together, and big data about all kinds of things going on in your network. We're investors in Kentic, which monitors networks and particularly focuses on the border gateway stuff and people attacking your network all the way out at the borders and network flow issues. So lots of excitement in the security space for us in areas, but too much of it in some ways in point solutions that have to be integrated to create a complete security solution. And there's still opportunity, I think, in doing the right kind of integration in those.
Great. Tom, when you're investing a little bit later in the stack, what are you seeing that's actually resonating from the seed stage that's not actually too much noise and delivering value?
What's resonating from the seed stage is technology that was developed by folks who have spent years in the government sector doing cybersecurity, counterintelligence, investigations for law enforcement. What's resonating in the seed stage are companies that can actually detect and discern lateral movement, companies that products serve to give you greater visibility as to who is in your house right now, not who's trying to break in tomorrow. Companies that can allow you to deceive, divert, and suppress the adversary once it's inside your systems.
So let me take it different. I do agree with both Howard and with you on a couple of points. So the view that I see being an entrepreneur and founder from Silicon Valley is a little different. I think where you want to see the evolution of security is the security will move from purely hardware-centric, device-centric. It needs to go to the next stage. Remember, we are all living in New York City, in New York Stock Exchange. The trading is happening with algorithms, right? And in Valley, you have Google developing driverless cars. Whereas when it comes to security, it's still very much people-driven. The SOC that you know will change in the next 5 years. There won't be any people. It'll be purely algorithms watching. When Russia and China is attacking us, you cannot hire people and have the SOCs maintained by MSSPs and by individuals doing it. You still need people, don't get me wrong. But 80 to 90% of what a security operations center will be done will change in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's where most of the bets that people are looking to make, either venture capitalists like both of these gentlemen, or even the entrepreneurs who want to do it. So SOC, whatever means by SOC, that is going to change in terms of the entire workflow. That is finding the intruders, finding the insider attacks, finding the externals, all the way to orchestration. So that's one school of thought. The second school of thought that's happening is once you detect, detection has to change. Today we are very much into operating as if, like what I call the 4 walls, you want to keep it in terms of prevention. The prevention pendulum is going to move a lot more towards detection. And when you go to detection, you have to go to what I call the point products. I want to do a detection for endpoint. I want to do detection for my network security. Or I want to do detection for my SaaS applications, right? How many of your SaaS applications are being monitored today? Is there an account takeover happening on your SaaS accounts, right? So each of these detection technologies have to happen there. So one is the SOC, when I talk about detection. Third thing is orchestration. Today we can detect, but at the end of the day, everything is a ticket system. You open up a ticket in ServiceNow, or you give it to some human being to do it. That workflow has to change. Some people call it the orchestration. Some people call it active response. That the whole area is going to evolve to the point 80 to 90% of, if I see a high-value target, high-value executive or account that I want to protect, I need to fix that. So those technologies don't exist today. Even if you want to spend millions of dollars in these 3 areas, you need to improve solutions to get to that stage. That's the evolution that I see for opportunity.
Playing off that, how much is going to be built internally for things like orchestration, where it's really specific to an enterprise's own environment, versus something that a startup can build and develop?
Very good question. I think in security, again, the other problem is given that there's so much opportunity, as Bill covered and as you are saying it, I think 2 things will happen. I think you have to understand is the products that you develop, is it a company or is it a feature? Or is it a set of small tools, right? So I think that's something is security will go through it. I tend to see there's a lot of point products or point features. Some of these things can be developed by many companies, and some can come from outside to innovation-wise. But you have to look at, is there enough critical mass to develop this to a company or a product?
One challenge there is specific to the fact that orchestration, even if streamlined, doesn't necessarily decrease the dwell time of the adversary on a system. And because of how attacks have changed recently to become, whereas you're seeing secondary attacks polluting the information supply chain of organizations, or brands being used against their constituencies, like with watering hole attacks, et cetera. Those are when your websites are turned against your visitors. We have to be cognizant that in order to suppress that or to limit that dwell time, you really need to streamline the reaction of the environment. If you would liken it to your own home, we need to actually let the Rottweiler loose, but ensure that it's not barking. Director Comey stated at the Georgetown International Cybersecurity Summit last week a new philosophy of the FBI, which was to ensure that the adversary could feel them breathing. And it's that type of construct that is necessitated by both seamless orchestration, but also using advanced analytics to discern and divert that traffic.
Yeah, we've just made an investment, I can't announce the name of the company yet, that is doing that orchestration, but their focus is on using advanced analytics to look at the priority of threats, because there's so many false positives coming up, or even if they're not false positives, they're positives with low value attacks in some sense. And they're trying to, and are in fact with some of their analytics, prioritizing what you respond to, what gets popped up sort of instantly versus just gets put in the logs to be seen later in the day. And I think that's a key thing that we're missing today, which is a really good prioritization of which attacks to go after right this second, because they're still in the system, we can get at them and maybe follow them back home, or because what they're attacking is such a high value that we want to make sure that gets locked down right instantly versus waiting for some of the other stuff to happen.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because security analytics is one of the biggest, hottest areas that we're seeing West Coast companies pitch us all the time, where you'll have machine learning experts from Google or some other web scale companies saying, we're the best machine learning algorithm, we'll ingest tons of data, we'll solve any problem you have in security. Where does domain expertise come in, and what's reality here?
Very good question. So I think there are multiple ways to build a product in a company. I give the two examples to people usually. You take the security domain people and then surround themselves with the big data analytics people. That's one way to build a company. Or you take the core big data, machine learning, analytics people, and then infuse with the security domain. It turns out that the two companies that you do A and B, if you do A/B testing, they're totally different results. So depending on the problem that you want to solve, it turns out that if the problem is a lot more algorithmic nature, you are better off getting people from the domains of the Googles and the Facebooks, the e-commerce, the Amazons of the world, and then put in people from your security domain, from Symantec, Trend Micros, and the defense department is coming in. Or you take the traditional security vendors and try to put a little bit of analytics, you can get a different product. So, but these two are totally different aspects to it.
And specific to that, I would say if you're doing big data analytics, then it's better to go to the Valley for your talent. But realistically, given that the real valley of talent when it comes to hacking is east of the Rhine in the former Eastern Europe, okay, we need to respect the fact that those offensive tactics need to be learned and need to be learned over time, and the defensive paradigms we put in place must be based on those offensive tactics. So a metaphor, forgive me, is like American football. Your defensive coordinator does not want you to go for it on 4th and 1. But the offensive coordinator continuously wants to. And the problem with CIOs and the problem with a lot of Silicon Valley thought is that you can go for it on 4th and 1 all the time. It's about increasing efficiencies, increasing access, increasing functionality and usability. All of those things exacerbate the attack surface for the adversary to not only burrow in, but to stay in persistently for a long period of time. So I would suggest that actually there's a hotbed of talent between New York City and all of the financial security experts that exist here, and all the law enforcement folk that have hunted these criminals for years, all the way down into Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia, where you have a lot of people that have done their service to the United States government and now who want to spread their wings and actually realize their vision in cybersecurity.
So we're seeing that exactly in a company of ours, Context Relevant, that also has co-investors Goldman Sachs and Bank of America. So to your point, taking the Wall Street expertise, pairing it with Richard Clark, a security guru out of the defense industry, and combining that together. Are you guys seeing this happening a lot more here in New York?
In financial security, yes, absolutely. We're seeing people taking the people out of the big banks who understand some of their problems. There are some that are human problems. The recent attacks on SWIFT that were really human attacks and human engineered attacks. And what we're seeing people do is put in systems now that will recognize, again, strange patterns, which is to be able to block these human attacks, which are sometimes just social engineering, but recognizably wrong. Bangladesh shouldn't be sending $85 million to the wrong place, and that should have been picked up and stopped, or at least dramatically slowed down, and yet it wasn't. So we are seeing that in the financial sector, people coming in and trying to do that. But I also agree with Muddu in that people are, I think, in many ways, underestimating what deep learning can really do. Some of the new techniques, and even the open source stuff that Google's put out, TensorFlow and so on, if you can feed it enough data. And when you look at all of the flow data, network flow data that we now have, you can start feeding it these things enough data for them to really learn, and really learn what is a bad actor coming in versus a normal actor coming in.
Muddu, playing off that, I'm sure you're seeing tons of companies that are saying that exact value prop to either partner with you guys or sell. How do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, I have two schools of thought. So one thing is, let's talk about the question. So I think in terms of what the trends that I'm seeing is, as Tom mentioned earlier, so there are hunters' roles being involved, because people coming out of what I call the NSA, CIA, the ex-law enforcement people. So the tools to support what I call a hunter. So if you go to LinkedIn and look for cyber hunters, they're totally different individuals. So these individuals are saying, you know what, even though algorithms are going to come and tell me something, I can do better decision than most algorithms or many analytics. So they want early indicators. They want to understand who is going to be the early person who will behave like Snowden, right? So these guys are saying, I can use my IQ faster than algorithms. So there's a separate workflow you can create for them. Then you have the traditional SOC analyst. like your incident responder, security admin, they want a certain workflow. So it's almost like two different classes. But as Howard talked about, this primarily depends on companies which are in financial sector, banking, maybe defense sectors, et cetera. But the traditional industries, I don't see that happening. That's one thing. But in terms of where security is, though, I mean, I want to make some little bit controversial, so let's excite the panel here. I think, look at what happened with Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, right? These guys have invented, they know exactly what each of you guys are going to do when you step outside of these walls from New York Stock. They know what you're going to buy for your spouse, what you're going to buy for your kids, what you're going to buy for yourself, right? They know exactly what you're going to do. I mean, Google now will tell you where you're going to go next, and as soon as you leave this building, right? That's been going on for 16 years. Security is just getting started. We still talk about big data and analytics, like as Howard is talking about. That will move into machine learning. So today, security is at very infancy stage. It's a round one of a 9-round boxing match. Long way to go. We are nowhere close to where e-commerce companies are or ad tech companies are there. They're extremely advanced compared to any security software today. Right? Imagine what DoubleClick or AdMob or Google or Facebook. These guys have a lot more high machine learning, deep learning technology that needs to be applied to security. That will change the game. That's the only way to disrupt when you have people like China and Russia trying to throw thousands and hundreds of people to attack you. You're not going to throw by throwing bodies at it. You need a technology disruption. But that's going to take time.
I agree with that. But I would also highlight the reality that integrity attacks are here. Hackers are capable of manipulating data. Last year, if you look at the major vulnerabilities in software code, the largest segment to explode was the vulnerabilities in security software, because a lot of security vendors weren't practicing what they preach. A lot of people were over-relying on their capabilities to protect themselves. I think it's also fundamentally important for the financial sector, since most of you are in that sector, for you to appreciate and recognize that your greatest nightmare is the one that people have seen signs of here in Wall Street and elsewhere in the world, of that market data that you hold as your holy grail being manipulated or a front run on you in the absence of the right controls or insights into how that could be used against you. And I think that the elite hacker communities of the world understand vividly how dependent you are on what types of information flows, how to manipulate those flows, and thus how to manipulate you. So as much as Google is omniscient to your activities, the hacker can become telepathic.
Yeah. There's one other area that's exciting us now that we haven't really talked about, which is the embedded systems area. And the Undersecretary mentioned the infrastructure protection issue before. I'm on John Deere's Global Advisory Board, and they're very focused on security for the embedded systems that are running their auto-track vehicles. So John Deere has more self-driving cars on the road and has for over a decade than anyone else. Almost every tractor in the major farms in the US and Western Europe is being auto-tracked, being driven as a self-driving vehicle, if you will. And they're starting to get very focused on how to secure all of the motor control, all of the track control, everything, so that those things don't go rogue or don't get hacked for ransom. And we've seen that you can take over a Tesla, you can take over a Jeep, and all that stuff. And it's the initial ones are more interesting demonstrations, but because of the value, if that Jeep happens to be a Jeep being used in wartime, it's not just a fun black hat trick. It's something that could be very critical. So we're seeing a lot of people now starting to look at embedded system security again, and it is a very high value area.
Let me comment. So I think my goal is not to give you gloom and doom here. I think there's hope here. I think if you actually step back and say, look, there may be national state attackers and some other countries may attack you and they can get through it. Any top hacker from outside the country can get it. But I think if you do basic hygiene, if you look at the type of attacks that earlier Tom was referring to, if you look at like ransomware, for example, or account takeovers, or phishing attacks, or lateral movement, or web exploits, there are like 4 or 5 big category items. That gives you 90% coverage. So as long as you deploy these technologies and tools to cover these 5 or 6 important ones, you get pretty good coverage. The remaining 10% is a long exponential tail. That may take a long time, but at least get the basic 90% done so that the organized crime and the lone wolf cannot attack you at least, right? That is what a good organization should do, is make sure that 90%, 95% is covered. The remaining 95 to 100% or 99 may take a long exponential tail. But at least if you got the good thing covered, you can at least protect your front doors.
And your limited people, your limited human capacity to respond can focus on that 5%. That being said, though, I think the security standards are outdated. The security standards were created in an era where many of these attacks that you mentioned did not exist or were not as prolific. There was no ransomware, there weren't application attacks, there were no attacks on mobile devices that allowed you to turn on the microphone, things like that. So I would suggest that, in fact, the paradigm, the standards, whether it's ISO, whether it's NIST, et cetera, really shouldn't be trying to develop a castle in the sky, per se, around your data, because the hackers will be right. You will never be right 100% of the time. But more of something more like a supermax prison. More of something where the data, who wants to break into a prison? How do you get out of a prison if you did break into a prison? Make the environment like that for the adversary, and you can win many battles on this playing field that we're playing on now.
So I want to switch gears. We covered interesting emerging technology, new attack vectors, and even new modalities, self-driving cars and tractors. What's the impact going to be on now existing public security companies?
Well, they're going to acquire companies, just as Splunk, which is public, acquired Caspita for us. I mean, they're going to be the buy versus build. If they want to be in the market quickly with a new technology, they have to buy. So for us, as a funder of early stage, most of our exits are going to be M&A. They're not going to be IPOs. They're going to be companies that have great technology, starts to get used by some big players, and then they get acquired.
I have no comment.
At RSA, there were 240-something new companies, brand new companies, this year over last year, that were on the show floor, 95% of which were features, 95% of which are just capabilities that should have been built a long time ago by the platform vendors, Symantec's, McAfee's of the world. Splunk has been very proactive. I commend their work. That being said, again, though, the features of the world need to become part of the long-term roadmaps of R&D. If they're not, then obviously they should be acquired. I'll give you a great example, ransomware. There are at least 4 or 5 companies on the floor of RSA that said they had the solution for ransomware. But the solution for ransomware, everyone knew what it was, essentially. You have to stop that process from occurring. You had to recognize it and stop it from occurring before it turns everything to stone. But nobody felt the time to build that across a scalable model that would integrate with all the various platforms and operating systems of the world quickly. So again, out of the 1,500 plus companies that are out there, I think a lot of them will become either acquired or become obsolete because their features will be replicated by the major platform vendors.
Muddu, speaking generally here for a second, from a big company perspective, how is the changing landscape being evaluated? Because Tom mentions that you got to make sure you get key features on your roadmap. How do you view what's interesting, what's not, what's going to resonate with enterprise buyers?
Again, I'm going to give you my view as a founder entrepreneur,
yeah.
right? I think the key is, as Tom mentioned about, as an entrepreneur, as a board or investor, what each of you should do is evaluate, like go through an MVP of a company. MVP stands for minimal viable product. Is this a company? Is this going to be a large company? Is it going to be a startup company? Is this a product? Is it a features? Is it a small enough tool set? I think you got to go through, evaluate that. The key is right now is there are so many different, as you said, 2,000 companies or 1,500 companies at RSA. Not every customer can buy all of them. Not everybody can deploy it, right? So that's not going to work. So I think there has to be a point of what I call the consolidation may happen. But the more importantly, I think I would look at each of these vendors and they see what they can do as a large enough footprint, or find themselves some partners that they can get along and work with them or displace them, et cetera.
Tom and Howard, do you have thoughts on a public security company that's been doing things well recently, aside from Splunk, which we mentioned?
Well, they've all been acquiring. I mean, I think we do see a lot of what we call them FNAC, feature not a company. You know, it's basically it's kind of neat, and it's a neat piece of security, and you'd like to have it, but you can't build an enterprise sales force to go sell it because it's too small, that you can't get enough, you can't get charged enough for it. And those we're seeing acquired. We're seeing them acquired by Splunk, but also by RSA, still pretty active in the acquisition space. You know, we've over the years, the Symantec's and McAfee's have basically grown inorganically more than they've grown organically. And that trend has to continue.
So how about this as another thread? As more large companies from the Fortune 500 are going to cloud, do you think that perhaps Microsoft and Amazon, now that controlling more workloads, are going to start building their own security? And now are they another threat to incumbent public security companies?
Yes. And you'll see them make major moves in the coming years to acquire very large personalities, I foresee.
How much of that is going to be, as you're saying, personnel versus technology?
They're going to try to build a gated community in the cloud, and which one's gated community survives will be the one where most of the Fortune 500 will migrate.
So we've got some companies putting stuff on the classified cloud, Amazon's cloud, and putting additional security into that cloud. And I absolutely agree with Tom. They are going very heavily onto selling those clouds as being more secure than their own data centers are. And they probably, in fact, are. And one of the things you can, of all the problems people have with Amazon Web Services has been an awfully secure environment for people, and even with multi-tenancy. And so even though it's been a prime target for hackers for almost a decade now, there has not been the widely reported, they took down AWS with any attack. Amazon has been fanatic about this from the beginning, and which is why they got the contract to do the classified cloud. I think IBM and Microsoft in their clouds, private clouds, are trying to get there. But they will, in fact, be a big part of the security solution for large companies. They will not, however, they have not solved some of the social engineering, authentication, people issues, because the weakest link, if you're an attacker, you go for the weakest link. And the weakest link will no longer be breaking in from the outside, it will be breaking in from the inside.
And to that point, there's such consolidation in these monstrous clouds of data that they become a ripe target for infestation by adversaries. And part of the misnomer of cloud, and even if you outsource your public cloud to one of these major entities that have significant security capabilities, is if you live in an apartment building or a condo complex, you should recognize the fact that they may have security for the building, but you're still responsible for locking your front door. You're still responsible for turning your alarm on in unit. And if your neighbor chooses to go on a date with a mass murderer and your door's open, you may have a problem. So we need to respect the fact that cloud computing is still evolving, and hypervisor security is one huge gap. So is machine identities and the capacity for infiltration.
So earlier we touched on the point around point solutions and becoming a little bit cluttered for CISOs to manage. One of our companies, vArmor, for instance, is not only going in with its cloud infrastructure security solution, but also selling on the point that they can rip out a lot of existing spend and consolidate. How do you guys view this trend, and which companies are going to benefit and who, frankly, will get hurt?
No, I think there's always going to be a friction between replacing products and having a new products come in. That's a balance. I think I view the problem differently. If you're a large enough company of a certain size, let's say if you're a 10,000 employee or more, the number of attacks that you probably are getting is roughly of the order of 2,000 attacks per day or more attacks, right? So how do you detect those 2,000 attacks, right? So, and the question is, if you want to go through all 2,000 attacks, the average single security admin and incident response can go through is only 10 per day. That means unless you have a security departments of 200 people, each of the enterprise, that's not going to work, right? So you definitely need tools to do it. So you have two problems. Either you're going to hire 200 plus people to go through manually each of these alerts and attacks to review it, or you're going to reduce that into single digits. If the number of attacks is more than, let's say, 2,000 per day, you're worse situation than Sony. At that point, that company needs to shut down, throw all your laptops, everybody go home for vacation for a while, right? That's not going to happen. So I think they have to decide how this is going to happen. Either I'm going to put tools, and quite a lot of tools. And I think it's not just a replacement to it. What problems we want to solve, what attack vectors like Tom talked about. I think I would go at that and see what happens.
Do you think that enterprises will have to solve this themselves, or where can startups and existing companies help out in that process?
I think all of the above. I mean, at this point, I think the key is you want to work with everybody, but the question is 1 + 1 + 1 should not be just 3. Can we get 33? How can we add these tools and integrate so that we make it that exponentially hard for the attacker to come in? That nobody's focused on. Everybody's doing their sweet spot, but merging 1 + 1 + 1, can we make it so hard that a unique solution emerges?
And so, that was not an outlier. One of the last studies I did when I worked at Trend Micro was on the entire Western Hemisphere, critical infrastructure. 600 critical infrastructure is reported to us on findings. And one of the findings was that 44% of them dealt with delete and destroy destructive attacks in 2015. Then when we asked them the follow-up question of were these part of activism, were these attacks part of someone just targeting you, trying to destroy your infrastructure, encrypt your infrastructure, they said no. It was actually as part of counter-incident response. So if you go back to that metaphor of that house, it's about the punitive nature of the environment, how that's changed. If you call out, I'm calling the cops, I know you're in my house, and the adversary, the burglar, chooses to set your house on fire, that's problematic. And this is what's become of the environment. From my 19 years in the business, I'll tell you, this is the most troubling thing that keeps me up at night, is that the environment has become more punitive. And ransomware is just a manifestation of that from a criminal gain perspective. But you can use ransomware as a construct as well. After I've stolen what I want, I can still encrypt your entire infrastructure.
But I mean, just to add to his comment, I mean, I think the problems that you're talking about, you can solve it through like Terminator movie, Skynet, right? Get the robots. I mean, they can easily detect, see, particularly for cloud and for the multi-tenancy thing, 80 to 90% of the problems can be solved with bots, with algorithms. What the traffic coming in, is your door really open? Is your port is being open? Who is attacking? So I think the issue is that the standard ones will happen. The question is nobody has built a Skynet yet, right? Skynet kind of things will happen. It's a question of time. Because people are not going to throw people to solve the problem. So I think 80 to 90% of the general attacks, the front door attacks, all the common things will be taken over by algorithms. Then we all can focus on the higher order items.
And that's where the prioritization becomes critical. Because you don't have 200 people, you have 10, and they have to work on those that are really going to end up as either ransomware or something that really is disastrous.
So I want to turn it over to audience Q&A in a couple minutes, but one final question is, a lot of this seems to be really stemming from people-related issues. How do you see the Fortune 500 talent pool for security analysts growing, shrinking over time, and how do you see this playing out?
I think fundamentally things have to change starting from the education. So I've already blogged about this topic. I think look at the top 100 universities in US. They don't have any cybersecurity program. Go to MIT, go to Stanford, go to UCLA. I don't hear that. That has to change, right? People have to be taught at universities, community colleges, all of the above. I mean, today I think there's a report saying 6 million jobs are there in security. It's like I call it the California gold digging environment right now. If you're a security guy, you can dig gold, free gold, pick it up. It's not free, right?
I do think the Cyber Command, US Cyber Command, and they're doing outreach all the way down to the high schools now and trying to do training. I think that is going to alleviate that somewhat. First, by getting kids interested and excited about it. Secondly, by building a large cadre of trained people who will not stay in the Cyber Command forever. They'll stay there for a few years and then they'll come out to industry. So over the next 4 or 5 years, I think we're going to start to see some flow from that into industry with really great trained people. But I also agree with what you said earlier, which is we've got to go to algorithms. We've got to go to bots to do most of this work.
One final multiple choice, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. In the next year, do you predict that there will be more startup acquisitions over $100 million, or more public security companies will be taken private?
No comment.
First,
The latter.
former.
Great. Any questions? There's a mic coming.
She's getting a mic.
A lot of the problems you mentioned with respect to phishing and all these attacks, and don't you see that if we were to move to IPv6, we can solve a lot of these problems? Not all, of course, but a lot of the hide-and-seek kind of problems. But we keep staying with IPv4, which is the fundamental flaw in all these problems. I mean, all these security problems that we are facing today.
IPv6 is a step in the right direction vis-a-vis authentication and encryption, but it's not the holy grail. And the delivery, you mentioned delivery mechanisms, phishing or application attacks, whatnot. That's just the delivery stage. Most of these hackers already have a presence inside some part of your supply chain. They can move laterally through it. I would hope that everyone moves to IPv6, but again, that won't solve all the problems, especially with the nuanced tactics being used with the advent of exploit kits and automation of lateral movement capabilities.
I agree with Tom. I think IPv6 will solve some problems, but particularly for lateral movement, moving inside, those things you still need to solve. Better threat detection is needed.
I think we absolutely have to. IPv6 has been sort of there for 10 years. We have to move there quickly because partly will help with these things. It will help especially with the IoT issue, where we're going to want to put 50 billion devices on, and if we don't have IPv6 really running, A, that can't happen, and B, it will happen badly. But it's just replacing all the infrastructure, people have just been too reluctant to do it, and they should have been doing it over the last decade.
Actually, I have a comment on that. Maybe I think the IoT, particularly if you go think about IoT cybersecurity and IoT devices, that's a totally different problem to solve. I think the issues there are not with IPv6. The problem is these devices are still 8-bit programmer controllers from Intel or Motorola, right? Most of the devices. The device manufacturers have no incentive to upgrade those devices. That's the problem. So either there has to be new regulation by the government and the Congress, saying that either give them a tax incentives to go upgrade it, or put some regulations saying that you need to remove all your 1970s and 1980s controllers, right? I mean, come on. I mean, most of the devices are still sitting with 8-bit controllers, and we are saying that our critical infrastructure is going to be attacked. I mean, something has to change. The Congress needs to do something, or give them incentive.
You said Congress needs to do something.
That's true. I guess that's it.
Hi. You gentlemen had spoke a while about essentially non-deterministic solutions, so the behavior, the typing, that type of thing. And Tom, I thought you pointed out perfectly that NIST is having a difficult time adjusting to that. Just from the panel's perspective, do you see non-deterministic type solutions being more accepted, moving from a dirty word to a good word?
Well, if I may compliment Dr. Ron Ross and some of the great passionate folk at NIST for their work, they did create an assessment standard, 853A, which really spoke to the scrimmaging reality, the need to scrimmage your infrastructure to ascertain if those controls are viable during attack. It was never widely adopted, and it was used as maybe a penetration testing byproduct standard. The NIST framework that was created, which is definitely a tremendous step in the right direction, was created with the genius of NIST that was then watered down by K Street.
No, but I think in terms of non-deterministic, I do see that coming with algorithms, right? If you go to deep learning and unsupervised algorithms, ideally any solutions, if you apply a real threat detection like algorithm, should not be a deterministic approach. You don't want the guy who created the algorithm or the hacker should be able to determine the system. And these are the new generation of systems will learn in your environment. They're so non-deterministic, even the person who created the algorithm cannot be able to stage the system. And that's going to happen.
Time for one last question back here.
Thank you. Earlier today, Deputy Undersecretary Schneck had told us, had alluded briefly to mergers and acquisitions in the cyber area. I think she had more in mind mature companies and the diligence process. And she said that the diligence process will now have to include cyber assessments, and that the auditing process would have to also account for cyber risk in terms of contingent liabilities. What standard would you apply, since we're kind of still in a vague twilight zone, what standard would you apply to indicate that, that the company has passed diligence muster on the cyber front?
So for network assessment or assessment of the due diligence of their own security posture of their infrastructure?
Yes.
I think the easiest one to align to is the one that was created by the red teams or the penetration testers, the ethical hackers of the NSA, in conjunction with some major think tanks, and that was called the CAG, C-A-G. The Consensus Audit Guidelines really lays out the easiest ways in which adversaries get in and out of your networks in real time, and it highlights the things that you can do to minimize and marginalize that phenomenon. The other, as I mentioned to the gentleman over here, NIST 853A, which is the standard vis-a-vis how do you actually assess or scrimmage your infrastructure against a live wire adversary. These are useful documented standards that have been blessed by numerous third parties.
And PCAOB is working on the standards there. The big four accounting firms and others have been doing a lot of cyber auditing over the years in general on the systems audits. And now they're branching into doing the security piece of the audits. And they're going to put out some standards, I think, late next year.
I think my answer is slightly different. I think if you have a new detection technologies which are machine learning, deploy that product as a part of due diligence, let it discover, do a baseline of all your assets and entities and machines, come back with a report. Run that thing for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So if your M&A activity is for 45 days or 60 days, allocate 2 weeks for cyber M&A risk analysis. And don't put people to it. Just give algorithms. Let algorithms figure out what's the baseline. Who is high-value target? Who is at risk? Which accounts are taken over? Which accounts are stolen? Right? That's the best approach than going through all this audit process. That's my opinion, personal opinion.
Great. We are out of time. Thanks, everyone. Let's give a round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you.